This is the 10th video in a series showing how to set up, configure, test, and debug the MVS Toolkit. In this video, we'll cover what logs are available to help debug the Toolkit client and server. First, we'll look at the client log. To get there in the client IDE, click Help, click About MVS Toolkit, click the Installation Details button, click the View Error Log button, click Notepad to open the log in Notepad. Here's a look at the client log. The top image is just a sample of log output, and the bottom image shows a sample exception. We'll go into the greater detail on some Java exceptions and what they mean a little later. First, let's look at the server-side logs. The server-side logs are found in the MVS server logs directory and include the audit log, the connection log, the pooling log, the trace log, and the web services log. Before we look at these one at a time, let's look at logging levels. The logging level is set for the Toolkit server in the Web Service Provider Definition dialog in the IDE client. By default, the Enable Logging checkbox is checked and the level is set to Info. Hit the drop-down as shown to see the logging choices. There are 4 logging levels here that you can select: Info, Warning, Error, and Debug. Info will give you the least amount of logging, where Debug will give you the greatest amount of logging. Now let's discuss the server-side logs one at a time. The audit log contains entries pertaining to commands that were processed by the Toolkit IDE client. You can look in there to find recent client activity. The connection log contains entries related to the connection between the IDE and the server. You'll look in here to try to figure out why there were connection problems between the Toolkit client and the server, like if the IDE couldn't connect to the server over port 3410. The pooling log contains entries related to the Toolkit server's use of connections to D3 using connection pool licenses rather than standard user licenses. You'd look here for any errors associated with connection pool usage. The trace log contains entries related to errors that happen when the server is processing web service requests. This is probably the first log to check if you're getting request failures. The other really good place to look for errors is the web services log. This log stores several kinds of entries about the server, including problems that happen when the server is starting and errors that occur while the server is trying to process requests, much like the trace log mentioned above. Before we go look at some errors and exceptions and what they mean, let's look at some logs you might find that are no longer being used. Specifically, the default log, the JMS log, the license log, and the redo log. The license log was used on earlier versions of the toolkit that required activation. You can ignore all these logs. In the next video, we'll talk about interpreting the logs and some HTTP errors. If you have any questions about any of the content we've covered so far, please contact Rocket D3 Support.